Welcome to the Two Marketing Moms podcast.
Two women with 50 years plus of marketing
Integrity
experience.
and culture are extremely important.
You can still say, I don't know.
Stop multitasking and be present in the
Moms
moment.
have balls, big time.
Welcome to the Two Marketing Moms podcast. We are two women with more than 50 years of marketing and advertising experience between us, and we want to talk about the struggles, the fails, and the wins that we experienced while building our careers, being a boss, juggling work and a home life, and arguably the hardest and yet most fulfilling job, being a mom. This podcast was created for marketing and advertising professionals, especially the up-and-coming marketing stars of the future. We hope these tips, tricks, and advice will help you navigate work and life and get ahead. Okay, Kelly, let's dive into this week's episode, which is how can women grow balls in business? And so take it away.
Yeah, the phrase "let's" or "grow some balls" is a rather controversial phrase, and it's a sexist phrase. Frankly, it's a sexist term. But people continue to use it. And what does it mean? Let's talk about that for a second. I mean, a lot of times it's directed towards men, but sometimes it's also directed toward women. And it means you need to have courage. You need to be braver. Also, to a certain extent, more masculine, more manly, more badass, more brave, strong, courageous, defiant, assertive, all these manly characteristics, which are associated with balls. Is what it means to grow balls. I look at it in a different way because clearly we're women. And I look at it as, I don't know that I would use that word to someone. I sure hope I've never used that phrase to anybody in any way, shape, or form. But I see it, kind of the whole Brene Brown, be brave, daring greatly, dare to lead, embrace discomfort, be vulnerable, be fearless, shoulders back, head up, Amy Cuddy, you've got this kind of thing. Yep. And that's what it means to me. And I think we need to come up with a better phrase, but I think it's the meaning behind it. There really needs to be a phrase for women, because women need to figure out a way to center themselves, to steel themselves. And, we do this every day, probably without thinking about it. We steel ourselves before we go into a big meeting. We look in the mirror, we stand up, we do our power poses, we walk in with confidence and we gather ourselves. And so where does that come from? And I think some of that we're going to talk about today and what that means. Again, we don't want to be crude or rude or disrespectful to any women by using the phrase, but what we're trying to do is kind of turn the meaning behind the phrase into something positive.
Agreed. And you just listed so many great authors and leaders. I feel like we live in this time with so many amazing women who have rephrased this and have allowed us to think about, this masculine energy and how do we harness it in a way that empowers us, that helps us, get ahead. I love this topic. You all are listening, right? We got your attention with balls. Okay. So just before we get into it, I thought that I would talk about why we're really talking about this. So
yes,
Kelly and I really wanted to talk, specifically to women and moms and new up and comers, not that we're leaving males out, right? Because I think males can definitely relate to this, right? Some males identify and sometimes are also offended by, being told that they need to grow a pair. But because of that, in the marketing and advertising world, most of the creative industry is male led. And that's why it's so relevant to us. We're both women that have had to, come into this industry and find a place for ourselves as women. Just a couple of stats that I found online, an easy Google search, you can find these, but about 30% of ad leaders are women.
Wow.
So as you move up the ladder, you are going to encounter probably some harsh male masculine energy, and it's going to be, it's going to give you a run for your money. Out of that, only 12% creatives are women, which is so
horrible.
true. I mean, you think of, I love Mad Men, right? Don't get me wrong, but like it was a pretty good depiction of women were, very few, especially when it came to creative. And there's a huge pay gap between genders, not just our industry, but a lot of industries. And, over the past many decades, women have really pushed that forward, I think. And it's getting smaller bit by bit, right? And yet most women have the purchasing power. So if you think about that, like a lot of the decisions are being made about marketing and advertising campaigns by men or men-led teams, and women are really the audience in a lot of cases. So anyways, this is kind of the segue for why we are talking about balls. And really, I think the takeaway, correct me if I'm wrong, Kelly, is that we want everyone to take away after this short podcast just some ways to harness growing balls, quote unquote, and not being the other B word that we know along the way.
Have been called.
And totally have been called. I've actually never had someone tell me to grow a pair. I have had people call me the other B word.
Yes, me too.
So anyways, okay, before we get to our tips and tricks, we thought we might just kind of tell our, just like some personal anecdotes about how we kind of were pushed to, grow some balls along the way.
Yeah. And I have 4 personal stories and 4 ways really, I think the start of assertiveness in women starts when you're very young. And I was a tomboy, and my dad was an athlete in high school and college. He played every sport there was. He played football for the Nebraska Cornhuskers. He almost went pro with the Broncos, and hugely into sports. In fact, sports and athletics in my family was more important than grades to a certain extent. My mother, believe it or not, is a professional triathlete. She's one of the top triathletes in the world in her age division and has done the Ironman 4 times.
Oh my gosh.
So I come from a very athletic family. So at a very young age, my parents had me doing softball and basketball and soccer. When in the 70s, in the Midwest where I grew up, they would only let one girl on the boys team, or you had to be on the girls team. And I was like, no way am I going on the girls team. So I was always the one girl on the boys team in elementary school, and the highest scorer, by the way. But from there, my mother started running. She started training for the New York Marathon and started asking me to do a bunch of races with her when I was when I was about 10 in 4th grade. And I started running, and I started, winning my age division. And from there went up to do cross country in junior high and track in junior high and high school. And I eventually in high school, I set a school record in the mile, the 2 mile, and the 3 mile.
What was your mile time, Kelly?
I believe it was 6:18 was my fastest time. I'd have to confirm with my records, but I'm pretty sure that was it. It's of course since been broken. And then I also did the mile relay. So for me, sports and this really came from my dad, and he taught me 4 important things. The first thing is that he felt it was really important for his children to differentiate themselves through sports or through, whatever activities. But for him, sports were really important. It helped pay for his college education. And so he pushed us in sports because he also believed that team sports teaches you a lot about what you learn in corporate America. And being a part of a team is extremely important. So that was the first thing that he did, is he pushed me to participate in sports and athletic, which really I think helped me to believe in my own personal power, my own fearlessness, and my own personal strength that, hey, gosh, my body has a bigger ability than I thought it does, because I am capable and able to, win races um, uh, and place well. And the several of the things that he did for me, and then and we'll go back and forth on your stories, was he also told me that he never wanted me to marry for money. He never wanted me to feel like I needed a man to support me. And so what he did is he encouraged me in my 20s to purchase a home when I was still single, to start building equity and wealth, because he believes that people should have three streams of income, not just your regular job, but also the stock market, if you can afford it. And then, of course, real estate as another way of building wealth. And so when I was in my late 20s, I bought my first condo, which helped me. And I bought it in San Francisco, let me just say, with the view of the Golden Gate Bridge between two buildings.
Holy cow.
It was fantastic. And I sold it for a lot of money that I ended up using with my husband on a down payment on our first house. And that taught me a lot about financial stability, right? And learning about finances. The next thing that he did was in my college years and my young 20s, my mom was busy with triathlons and my brothers. And so my dad started taking me on a lot of his business trips. So he's taken me to Germany, to Monterrey, Mexico, to Scotland, to Moscow, all around the world. And I had to participate in these dinners, socializing dinners with different people that he worked with. So at a young age, I was kind of thrown into communicating with really men that were significantly older than me, my dad's age. And so I had to learn how to communicate to them and how to be an interesting person and how to, speak not like I'm a teenager and speak, like I know about things in the world. And then the last thing is related to that. He encouraged me to excel in business and hone my skills as a communicator, to have an opinion. We talked about this last time, and to be well read. And so those four things really helped me to, quote, grow my own balls, and to be fearless, because he had faith in me and pushed me to, be the best that I could be through athletics, through school, through grades, through my career, et cetera. And so that's where a lot of my confidence was born from, in terms of how my dad raised me. And so I absolutely have to give him kudos for pushing me. And I understand you have some similar stories.
I do. I also think it's important to mention that, like, a lot of people weren't born into a family that helped them build that confidence, because like I did. And so I can imagine that, when you're like starting off in business, it's like, oh my gosh, if you came from a background where you didn't necessarily have those skills ingrained in you, you can maybe feel a little bit behind the curve. But as I said, like at the beginning, like all of these amazing authors, like you can go into TED Talks and watch an insane amount of amazing women. And now today is the time for you listeners to be, growing that confidence. So anyways, I just wanted to say that. Yeah, it's so funny, Kelly, because we just have so much in common that we probably didn't know. I agree. My confidence was also kind of ingrained, taught to me from an early age. My dad is kind of from the South and was the black sheep of his family and moved to New York City to work. And that is where he met my mom, a very tough as nails, Northern woman. And, my mom really was the one who taught me what a hardworking woman who was going to accomplish what she put her mind to was going to accomplish in her world, in her life, and was certainly part of the kind of the Mad Men era-ish, where in her in her industry, it was pretty much all men. And so she became really tough, living in New York City and being part of that. I think she was really tough. So, agreed about your story about sports. I remember, so I was a runner, I was a track, I was a sprinter, and I did the hurdles.
Oh gosh, that's the hardest.
And I remember at like this one like district meet, I just got out of my head for once and just won by a landslide. And afterwards, I was so filled with emotion. Like it was just this emotional release that I needed after the race. I was like so surprised that like I had just made a personal record, and my dad was there and was walking across the field to me. And I was kind of like crying because I just, the tears were just a release, they didn't mean I was sad. And my dad told me to man up. I'll never forget that. And like, I was on one hand so insulted. And then on the other hand, like, I get it. Like there's, what is the saying? No crying in baseball. Right. I wasn't crying about anything particular. It was just my, release from winning. Anyways. So that just gives you an idea of like the kind of guy my dad was. So, just like my parents, encouraged me to buy my own house. I did when I was, I think 23.
Wow.
Yeah. And then also like you, my dad also brought me on a lot of business trips. And when I was in the end of high school and college, my dad was working for a company that sold parts to the racing industry. And he was a NASCAR guy his whole life. He loves cars. And so, and I grew up on it. And I guess when I graduated high school, he took me on a trip to, the NASCAR Beltway, AKA Charlotte, North Carolina. And we got to go to Petty Enterprises and Dale Earnhardt's headquarters. He was my personal hero. And talk about a male-driven industry.
Yeah.
Right? It is full of testosterone and not a lot of women. And it was just like such a great insight into what business was like from a really, a pretty sheltered, privileged, naive point of view. I hadn't gone out into the world yet. So that's just a story that I wanted to tell about just kind of setting me up, just those little increments of experiences and what I learned growing up about confidence and not being fearful, not being a fearful person, just going out and conquering and showing up.
That says a lot about the role of parents and especially dads. If you think about, both of us having similar experiences, our dads not treating us like girls, right?
Yes.
Not
my dad wanted
masculine
boys. He didn't get any boys.
I was the only girl and I was the oldest. But, not treating masculine versus feminine, both boys and girls need the same types of experiences, and balancing them out as a parent is really important. And I kind of wanted to add for the moms, obviously, I feel like moms have the most balls in the world because we actually birthed and nurtured humans until they could eat, sleep, and speak on their own. And yet there's this shame about what our bodies look like after giving birth. And instead it should be celebrated. I mean, look at the scars that we've been given to show what we've been through. So, moms have balls, big time.
Yeah. It's all about those, every little experience builds you up to growing that confidence, those balls. I agree. Okay. Anything else we want to talk about, like in terms of our stories? I mean, we could probably go on and on, huh?
I know. I think that recaps most of the stories. We want to kind of talk about, what our advice is. I mean, we've talked about some of it.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll kick this off because I've been thinking a lot about this. I think one of the things that I keep seeing people talk about is imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And it kind of drives me crazy because I have moments where I think about this, but I just have confidence in what I'm going to say and do. And if I don't know the answer, I think we talked about this on another episode, I just say that I don't know, or I say that I will figure it out. I never try to pretend to be anyone that I'm not. And what I think that does for me, it just makes me feel like I am approaching every situation in an authentic way. That way, when I do have to stick up for myself, if I do have to have a hard conversation, if I do have to step in it, I'm doing it knowing that I know exactly what I want to say. I know what I want the outcome to be, and I'm not going to apologize for it. That being said, I mean, there's a good percentage of time that I fail at that because I am an emotional person.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that to say that I am always a winner, but I think when I come at it from that approach, I've had success in being seen as a leader, as a strong leader, as a respected leader, and maybe very little of the negative stuff.
Yeah, those are some great points. And I think a lot of bravery is, obviously you have to have something inside of you. And even with imposter syndrome, if you feel that, you have to in order to succeed in any career, you have to figure out a way to push that away and be brave and be fearless and steel yourself like we talked about. And that can come out in many different ways. And a lot of it can come in terms of helping you in your career by asking for raises. You're not going to get a raise. No one offers you a raise. No one just says,
right,
oh, you're doing a great job. Here's some extra money. You got to ask. And so if you're one of those who hasn't asked, you're not going to receive. And so every single time that I have asked for a raise, every single time, and I have asked many times, I have received one. So it's not like I didn't have a backup and a rationale and a 10-page document stating why I deserve it. But I've never received something I haven't asked for. And so that's where the bravery comes in. And little things, even like getting an interview. You don't just send your resume into the HR director. You need to be brave. And I'll give you another example of what I did in the year 2000. 2001, I was starting to look for jobs in DC, and I had no connections to DC because I had lived on the West Coast in San Francisco and LA. And so I figured out who the top advertising agencies were, and I literally reached out to the heads of the agencies, the owners. And I got 3 meetings with 3 different advertising agency owners. Those did not lead to jobs, but I met them. And the most interesting one is David Martin, the head of the Martin Agency in Richmond, Virginia. I emailed him. He said, come on down to my house in Richmond, Virginia, and we'll meet and we'll have a face-to-face meeting. I went down to his house in Richmond. He has had a house behind his house where his office was. He gave me his books autographed, and we sat there and talked about advertising. And you know what? And you know why? You know why? Because people don't have the balls to ask a CEO for a meeting. I just want to pick your brain. I want to learn from you. You're not asking anything. People want to, I will always accept an informational interview. Someone wants to pick my brain. Hey, that makes me feel smart. They're not asked because people aren't brave enough to do it. And I was brave enough to do it. And I got a meeting at this guy's house, Yeah.
I feel like I'm sure someone famous has been quoted, but I always like, this is just a personal mantra of my own, is like, if I'm not uncomfortable, then I'm not doing something that's brave, or I'm not doing something that's out of my zone, which means I'm not growing and I'm not being pushed to, learn something new, do what you just said, like, make new connections. And I feel like that kind of sums that up there. Like, you have to get uncomfortable and brave and do the things that, you think may be impossible.
So let's start with some advice. I think, being proactive is important. And another word, which can be, seen as a bad word, or phrase, is self-promotion. You can't be afraid to self-promote yourself. We're in advertising and marketing. We promote our clients all the time. You should also be able to promote yourself and be okay about it.
Yeah. I mean, I feel
tough
like
for women.
Yeah. My husband was telling me, so we've spent this entire week talking about balls in my house. And, funny enough, like, we were talking about it last night, and this morning I found this little thing that my daughter had written to my son. It said, "Brooks, you have balls. Ha ha." Because we were so in depth into this conversation, but he had said that part of his master's program, he was taking psychology, in marketing and advertising and design. And one of the articles was kind of like this test of women that had applied for a job, and kind of like an A/B test, like a women that had more self-promotional, maybe what you would consider quote unquote aggressive language in their cover letter and resume, versus a woman who came across very nurturing and not confrontational, and had a totally, maybe in some cases you could see it as like very passive and soft approach. And that the woman who was aggressive and self-promotional was to looked at in a negative light. And the whole lesson he was learning was about, differences in perception and how to really position yourself in the right way. So I think when it comes to self-promotion, there is a balance that you have to strike between being that really confident, but also nurturing leader, because you can be both. So some women come across really cold and, have a lot of masculine energy. And then some can't come across maybe too soft, too much feminine energy. And I think you've got to figure out the intersection of both of those, so that, the way people perceive you is empowered, is a leader that they want to get to know, instead of someone who is, maybe too into themselves. That could be the impression.
Sure.
Right? It's such a hard balance.
It is. And it's funny that I don't think men think twice about this stuff. And women do.
Probably not.
Another funny story is I once did not get a job. And the rationale for not getting the job was I was told I was too polished.
Ooh. I mean, yeah. I mean, I feel like I was like that before.
Oh, wait a minute. Okay. So, what does that mean?
Yeah. Let me be less. Okay.
Organized. I'll wear a t-shirt next time. I mean, what? Smudge my makeup. Not be so prepared as I present.
I think what
funny.
you were,
would you say that to a man? That's just
no. What you were experiencing was probably intimidation.
Yes. And I think we should definitely do an episode on that, because I think you and I, as type A people, definitely probably suffer from being told we're intimidating. I've definitely been told I'm intimidating, and gosh, that's not my intention.
And I get intimidated all the time. I feel like.
But you can come off as intimidating too. And
Probably,
I think, you know,
for
we don't realize that. And so, you know, how do we change, or should we change our behavior knowing that piece of information? Anyway, getting off course.
Yeah.
But that's another topic for another time. So
yeah.
beyond,
But I think pitching yourself always, ABP, always be pitching. And
Yes.
that doesn't mean that you should be in people's face about it. You should always be thinking about where your place is and how you're going to grow within a position, a company, with a client, on a project, whatever it is.
I was going to say, stop hesitating. You know, women, a lot of times men will just jump in with a response. And I'm not saying that women should do the same thing, but you know, there's a point when you know something, you don't need to hesitate. You don't need to necessarily, you know, be careful with every single word that you're saying if you know what you're doing. And a lot of times women hold themselves back with their opinions and hesitate because they're waiting for someone else to step in.
Here's another good one to build off of that. I often, or no, not often, but like I have hesitated because I am afraid that my response will be too emotional. And in that case, I feel like hesitation is a good, just like innate quality, right? It's going to tell you when to go or not to go. And yeah, I just completely lost my train of thought there.
We can go
We're
back.
going to have to edit that. We're going to have to edit that one out.
We could go back. How about not avoiding confrontation?
Yeah. Well, that's another one where you kind of have to use that innate, you know, fear, like that quality inside you that tells you, should I go for it or should I not? Because some confrontations are worth it and some confrontations are not.
Most are not, I would have to say. But some are.
Agreed. And I think
pick your battles.
I think the ones that definitely are, which now I'm thinking about this now, like the ones that aren't are the ones that are emotionally charged.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, for me as a very emotional person, I can be all of the emotions within 5 minutes sometimes. I can get caught up in that, and my responses are emotion based. And, you know, men love to say, you know, that women are emotional. You're being too emotional. And I was actually talking to a friend of mine who works at another agency, and she said, you know, the men are more emotional than the women in our agency. And yet the men run the agency and they're always telling us that we're emotional. So I've always tried to, I want to avoid that at all costs. I don't want to tell someone to tell me that I'm being emotional, because I think from man to woman, that's kind of a dig, or it's meant as a dig.
Yeah.
And so there are times, confrontation or not, and also hesitation, times where I've hesitated is when I've felt like maybe I'm in too much of an emotional place and I need to dial it back and get, you know, access more of my rational side so that I can come up with an argument that is maybe has more logic than emotion. And then it will bounce so much better, I think.
Sure. Well, any final thoughts on a better way to say how to grow balls? I think you had some additional advice.
Oh, yeah. How about, I know you have lots of opinions about this, Kelly, about how to run the room.
Of course.
Like,
in my way.
I think this is another area that, like, when we're in meetings with a mixed group of genders, right? And definitely a mixed group of masculine and feminine energy. Like, how do we come across as a leader that people want to look up to, that they want to hear from, and run the room, and don't let people run over us? I again, it's a tricky balance, but I'm wondering if you talked about in one of our podcasts about if you're the one running the meeting, you should be at the head of the table. And that is one great tip. Any others?
With regards to the room? Oh gosh, I don't know. I feel like I've been running the room for a long time and I'm comfortable doing it. And it's a combination of trying to have a personal connection with people. But also, when we're in that room, we're there to help them and solve their problem. It's not about arrogance and awards and I have this title and you have that title. I'm here to solve your problem. Let's get down to brass tacks, roll up our sleeves and solve the problem. And I think if you have that attitude, then it's much easier to run the room because you're clearly taking the lead and coming up with solutions immediately, but also listening. I mean, listening is a huge part of running the room and getting everyone's input.
I also think being prepared is also a huge one. I mean, obviously you can't prepare for every meeting, for every conversation that you're going to have. But when you do have those opportunities where you may feel like, as a woman, you need to grow some balls before you enter that boardroom, or before you get into that meeting, or before you have that pitch, you've got to, I keep losing all of my thoughts, Kelly. We're going to have to edit this damn thing. Gosh.
That's okay.
I should have wrote better notes.
No worries. Again, what does it mean to have balls? We're going to reframe it to make it less of a sexist comment. And it's all about being fearless. It's all about being brave. It's shoulders back, heads up. You've got this. Steel yourself. Move forward, be decisive, lead, be courageous, be assertive, respond maturely. When they go, Michelle Obama's, when they go low, we go high. Yes. All of those things are a way of reframing the concept.
Agreed.
Because the concept's there and it's a demeaning one, but I think we can turn it into a positive. And those are messages that women need to hear in order to be successful.
Agreed. Good tips, Kelly.
All right. Well, let's close out today and we'll see you next week.
Thanks.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you liked what you heard, please leave us a podcast review or send us a message at twomarketingmoms.com. And subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time.